Okay, hi, welcome back. My name's David Blissett. Today is the 7th of August 2022, and this is my first recording of the year, at least official recording. But now I'm going to publish the contents here or make this available to my subscribers. Is a whole different story. But yeah, it's been a busy year. I've been away working on the Blazor technology for the client I'm currently working on, and the frame rate you're currently seeing here is not a reflection of the actual frame rate. It's showing like 20 odd frames a second, but that's because I'm actually doing a screen recording at the same time, and I think it's going to be overdraw. So whatever figure you're seeing there, it's going to be double that, right? So if you're seeing like 24 frames a second, it's going to be like 48 frames per second when I'm not doing the recording. So I want to make kind of diary note as to where we are right now, more so from the idea that we're moving from the standard shader over to the universal render pipeline, URP, and that's a massive change for us. And so yeah, I just kind of want to document some of the steps, some of the changes, because I've just walked away from this for almost a year, and when I came back to it, it was like, oh my god, what's going on? So yeah, let me stop the actual the game here now, and then we just go into it. Okay, so all right, first thing here, we want to stop that. Okay, so the project itself is an entirely new project in the sense that the previous project was set up for Unity standard shader, and I've been like, all the work I was doing the last 2 years had been with the Unity standard shader, right? And what we've got here now, what you're seeing here, as far as this is one of the levels, there's maybe about 10 levels that have been built so far. This is just kind of like the first time I've got the level up and running within the environment and seeing some good numbers, right? So how did I achieve them? What was the issue that I had to spend like over a year trying to engineer things so that it'll actually run smoothly, like at least give me like near to 50 frames a second, right? And hey, I'm targeting like 150 seconds before I actually start bringing in like the NPCs and things like that. Obviously that's a bit more ambitious, but how can I say, if I'm not going to be going for real-time lighting, I think that 150 odd frames a second should be doable. And so yeah, let's go through the anatomy of what's been built. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between Unity and Houdini, and just trying to kind of detail where things are and why they've been set up that way. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is actually highlight the idea of this level, right? So if I highlight the level here, everything's in one. The entire level, all the geometry has been merged into a single piece of geometry. The collision geo is also coming through at the same time in terms of, I use PDG, procedural dependency graph, to do the binding in Houdini, and then from there I go into Unity and just do a connect using the standard configuration. So let's see if I can highlight what that looks like. So there's the Houdini engine, right? I'm gonna want to go through some of the settings, because the way how things used to work maybe a year and a half ago, it was a bit different when I came in here, and it's not that it was buggy, it was just more the case of, why is this not working? Right? Okay, so the first thing is we got the network connect. The idea here is you literally drag and drop this into the environment, and it'll do its smoke and mirrors with binding, whether it be a session connect or some other kind of a connection. So we got two here, so we can either have a piped connection or a socket connection, right? One of the things that you want to consider also is the plugging settings. So when you just come back into the environment, if you've been away from a while, it's going to be asking you for a Houdini environment file. And so I did have this within the project folder from the previous version, but it had kind of changed a bit in terms of how it's actually set up. So if I go in here to assets, There's the Unity Houdini environment file. Let's see if I can open it from there, or if it'll give me the option to open it from there. Probably come up in a notepad, and there are the variables being set to wherever the root directory is for Houdini, and that's as much as I've had to do, right? So without having that, it's kind of lost trying to figure out where the geometry is being baked to, where it's actually sitting. And so as long as it knows where those locations are, it'll be able to figure out what you're actually trying to do. So you've got to make sure that that's set up, right? And then there's the variables being printed out there. And then when you're actually dragging and dropping the Houdini plugin into Unity, it'll want to know where that specific version of Houdini is sitting. And so that variable needs to be set. It might be set by default. If it's not, you'll need to make sure that that is being set. So that's kind of critical. Now, before I go any further, today I had maybe like 3 instances of Unity open, also had Houdini open, and those are large applications. And it took up quite a lot of memory, probably maxed me out as far as memory is concerned. And that caused a problem. But it wasn't obvious what the problem was. So essentially, I was trying to bake the geometry. The project wasn't complaining what was happening, but when the results came through, you were like being shown the top half of the project. So here's 2 levels, right? The top level was fine, the bottom level was fine, but the splitter, so where you can actually walk down the stairs, that was all closed off with geometry. And I was like, that's not what I left in Houdini. And so I went over into Houdini and I actually baked just the first level in Houdini, and it was giving me the same thing. Now for the last few months, this cutout here, so you can actually go from the top floor to the bottom floor, was working perfectly fine. And so I was kind of concerned. Was it because I just upgraded Houdini? What was the cause for this? In the end, after doing some investigation, it was a memory issue. It was the fact that I had way too many apps open, and essentially I was maxing out the available memory for the calculations to be done. And then Houdini itself after started to throw. Right. We just had a bit of a glitch there. Right, we're prompted with the operating system, some issues with available space. We managed to get that started, so we'll just pick up and continue. Right, so what are the kind of issues that we were detailing? So we just talked about the fact that we've moved over to UDPR with Universal Render Pipeline. We'll also talk about some of the settings as far as like the Houdini engine and the plugin, and making sure that we have the various variables being assigned correctly when going in. We then highlighted the actual plugin itself. Then we have this working directory concept. You must set this to the Houdini working folder for the project that you're trying to do the import for, or you're not gonna have much luck in terms of being able to get the assets to load. Now, one of the funny things is you got this reset button, you got the refresh button. Now, what that's going to be driving is a reset set of all the settings for the top network. And if this is not showing up, then a listing for all the internal HDAs, right? If these are not here, you're not going to be able to know specifically what you're targeting for your import, right? So that can be a bit of a hassle, because sometimes you'll just open up the project and maybe it doesn't make a connection to Houdini, but it doesn't tell you that, and you're there thinking that it's doing a cook for the geometry, and it's actually not doing the cook successfully. So after hitting the reset, then hitting the refresh button, then at that point, then you'll find that the top node will then be populated with a list of the various HDAs that have been bound inside of Houdini itself. So let's just take a look on this a bit more detail. So you have the network, then this is the same node that has been dragged in. So in this instance, there it is, Network Connect, that's what it's called. That's been dragged in, and then the next thing we do is we highlight that node and we go to the menu for the Houdini engine and highlight PDG, and then create a PDG asset link. Now at that point, that node will be loaded. Now sometimes I find that just coming in here and making sure that this node is populated with whichever HDD I'm targeting for the import. But one of the things that's important is I'll say auto load result, make sure that that's ticked, and I'll say show result. Those two appear to be quite important. Now, back in the day, I would not really care about this, but I'm finding that if you have the top node filter and the top output filters both selected and doing a filter by those variables, for me it doesn't work. I don't use it, right? But you want to make sure those are unticked, and then when it says use H engine data, you also want to make sure that that's unticked. So clear the selection on these. By default they will be selected, and then say auto cook, right? That's what I've had as a success. So I'd have selected the targeted HDA, and then from there I'd either dirty that node or I'd cook that node. And then one of the things that you'll find is it's a bit hit and miss sometimes. So you'll hit the cook node and it's actually cooking, and then you actually have to go back up, and for the network connect node in this instance, it'll be cooking and you'll see the cooking information being played back here, right? And then that's as much you'll do. So in each instance, I'll want to make sure that auto load results is ticked and show results is ticked, right? Again, with the top node selecting or highlighting the HDA, the internal HDA that we're trying to cook from Houdini. So while that's cooking, you'll see that the asset menu is being populated, and that'll let you know that it's not only cooking, but it's also importing the geometry across. So in this instance here, I've got quite a lot of that geometry hidden. So let's unhide some of that just to kind of give an idea as to what it is that we've been working with. So I'm going to go for the geometry in this instance. So here we have level geo version 3. So I'm just going to zoom out in a moment so you can tell that it's just that level that's currently visible. So if I go ahead here and highlight this, so there you go. So you got all the network of the other levels that are being shown on screen there, right? But I hide those because right now I'm really focused on optimizing level and making sure memory and things like that is moving, and we're getting a good frame rate coming. So once we get those settings pinned down, then we can replicate those settings to the other levels. So I'm just going to hide that for a second, right, and just focus for what we want to look on. Actually, there is one more important thing that I want to touch on. Okay, so let's say I select that specific level out there, for example. You can see that it's bound on its materials because we highlighted those materials over in Houdini, so it knows what it needs to be bound on when it comes in. I'll just zoom in, right? So the node, the group node that's one level above, has this bake setting. At the moment, it's not highlighted for me to click on it for some reason. Possibly because it's grayed out. So let's try and see if we can highlight that. Okay, so visible, that is visible. It's possibly not connected, so I can't click on bake to bake that. But when it does bake, what it'll do, it'll put the baked asset in a location that I can then drag and drop it into the solution, right? So as an example, let's see here. So this is a geo node, and if I select that there as a prefab, so that prefab is in that location. So when it's saying baked, right? So it's in the Houdini assets cache, and then when you bake, it'll bake to this location. I don't have to remember location as long as I see it pop up on the screen, and I can drag it into the scene and it'll be in the correct location based on where the connect node is actually being set, which is 000 at the moment, right? So those settings are really, really important and kind of key to getting this overall process working in a fashion that you want it to work. Okay, so let's go ahead now, and we're going to hide all those additional nodes. Okay, and we're going to start talking through some of the specific settings to the level itself. to kind of get this functionality up and running. So let's zoom in a bit more. Okay, right. So as I said, the geometry is coming through in this instance, and it also has the collision geo at the same time. We're also breaking up the asset into logical bits, right? So the points come through, and that will have the lighting, that'll have the reflection maps, and also the decals and the actual props for the level, right? And then we also separate out the stairs, so those will come through separate. And then we have the principle of the stair collider. So there are two stair colliders. There is the step colliders, which the NPC will step on, and let's see if I can highlight that there. Okay, so step collider, right, and those are collision geos, right? Which for the zombie, as it's stepping, it'll step on each one of those individually, and there's a whole bunch of animation and calculation that's being kicked off in the background that knows how to work with that. But the setup, it must be set up in a very, very specific way. So right now we're just going to have a quick look on the navigation panel, and that's how the artificial intelligence is being driven. Okay, so let's see if I can record this in a way that makes it make sense. So you have the main AI navigation mesh for the bottom part of the level and the upper level as well, right? But the steps, the way how you're configuring this, we're saying that the zombies, if you've hurt the zombie and it's crawling, it shouldn't be able to crawl up the slope, right? So the slope is how we drive the actual animation itself for, you know, location and direction, so on and so forth. But what we're saying here is, if the NPC is damaged in any way at all, it's crawling on its stomach, it shouldn't be able to crawl up the stairs. So we've created a very specific navigation mesh, and let's see if we can show you what that looks like. Okay, so not gonna be that stair collider. Okay, right. Okay, so this stair collider, it's just a single plane that goes from the bottom level to the upper level. Okay, and what we've done here is we've marked that as static, but also within the navigation area, it's on the no crawling layer, and that's why it has that color. So it's user 14 here, but if you notice that the color corresponds, right? And before we bake, we come over here. This would have probably originally been unwalkable, but we've now set it to non-crawling. So that means that if the NPC is damaged in any way, if it gets to this area, the logic has been coded to say if it's trying to go up no crawling, it will not be able to do that, right? Okay, so how are we setting that up? Essentially, this is the collision geo that's coming through from Houdini. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a single plane. We make sure it has a mesh renderer, we make sure it has a mesh filter, and then it also has this collider. So originally when it comes through, it might not have maybe the mesh filter and the mesh renderer, right? And so what I then do is I drag the mesh into those placements there, and that's important for the bake. So if it doesn't have these settings, you'll be hitting the bake button and nothing will be happening, right? So once you've configured that using those settings, making it look like that, then the next thing you want to do is you'd come over to the navigation panel for the artificial intelligence. You'd make sure it's on navigation static. So let's just quickly go back. So here we have this, and it says navigation static, right? You come back over to navigation tab. Again, that tick box will come through. You select the correct navigation area. In this case, it's no crawling, and again, that's been coded for it. So it's not like we're just getting that for free. There's logic going on, right? We have to make sure that the no crawling is set in the new user area, and then you go and you hit the bake button, and it'll bake just that specific one, right? But at the same time, you might not want that to show up afterwards, so you might just come back in afterwards and hide that, right? So something like that. So you would have baked. So if you go back to the bake, so there you still have that, right? So you still have the nav mesh, the navigation mesh, but you now have hidden the geometry that makes that all come through. Again, let me see if I can just change the camera angle, and there you go. It's just a plane, right? It's not using the steer geo, it's only using that plane for the navigation mesh to be baked successfully. And again, you can hide it afterwards, right? So outside of that, the next thing that you want to be concerned about is the steps themselves. And again, so this is the actual geo, I believe. And if we come in here, what we're looking for now is the actual steps themselves. Okay, so there are a series of points that come through from Houdini, and each point will bound on a collision box, if that makes sense. So let's go to the inspector, and if I select one of these and navigate to it, right, so that's just a single box that's coming through from the points, right? So it's got the right orientation in terms of XYZ, and that's what the zombie's feet is using to step on. And in order to make that happen, it has to be on the right layer, and in this instance that's the step layer. If the steps layer is not selected for that collision geo, it won't work. Okay, now that again is not something that's coming in bound on the actual level data. This is a separate HDA in Houdini that's bringing all that data across. Okay, so that is a must if you want the zombies to step on the stairs. If you don't want the zombies to step on the stairs, then don't put that on the step layer. And again, the mesh render here, when it came through, it didn't have a material set on, and somehow it's bounding on the standard shader. Probably don't want that, but all I'm doing here is just hiding the mesh renderer because I don't really need it. I only need those box colliders for the zombie to step on. That's it, right? So now that that's configured, the next bit that's kind of relevant. Okay, so the FPS, the frame rate was a bit low this morning, which was quite disheartening. And so it's like, okay, what's the next step, right? So the next step to think about in terms of optimization is going to be lighting. And at the moment, we're bringing through quite a lot of lights because geometry-wise, we're saying we want lights. But at the same time, we're not spending a lot of time actually choreographing the environment to say all these lights are the right color, some of them should be blown out, some of them should be red, things like that. We can do that later. Right now we're talking purely optimization. And so what we've done is we've gone away from global illumination, and we're kind of sticking with backlight as a concept for the time being. No mixed lighting. We're just gone straight for backlighting, with the idea being that, we're just using point light. So we're not even trying to use any kind of HDR lighting or anything like that, which we might do. But right now we're just kind of getting things to the lowest common denominator to make sure that we are putting lighting in the scenes, but we're not trying to be too clever because the device that we're targeting is lightweight. So we shouldn't be trying to do too many calculations on there and having, global illuminations and things like that going on. So all the lights have been selected, and then we just go ahead and put it on the bake mode. And then from there, we come through. At the moment, the light mapper is set to enlighten. That's being marked as depreciated. So I'm looking at some old documentation. I will need to make sure that I update that with the latest configuration. Now, this is the first project that's been in Universal Render Pipeline. So when I came in here for this setting or for the scene, the lighting section was empty. So I just hit the new lighting settings that gave me that configuration there. I marked the baked global illumination to ticked. Lighting mode is baked indirect. That's been set. And then outside of that, I've also tweaked the light map size to 2K. It was 1K originally. And then from there, I'd hit generate the light maps, and yeah, job's a good one. Also, light probes are being utilized. So if I go down here and hit the light probes at the moment, see if we can get that. So in that section of the level, and again, this was just more like for testing purposes, I essentially just kind of said, okay, fine, I need to edit the light probes. Again, this is just kind of following the documentation. You go in there, you hit the edit light probes, and then you select the ones that you want to duplicate, hit the duplicate selected button, and then you just drag them out into the rest of the scene. I was thinking that I'd probably want to automate that, but it seems like something that you probably need to do manually. And against that, the results that I got were much better than what I had earlier. So if I said this morning I was getting like 20 frames per second, after putting in those settings, I was getting like 40-ish, going 45, and it was like, okay, fine, no, that's a good result, right? Because I think that I was actually going the other way. So I went back to Houdini and started ripping things out. So the way how we're told by Meta is that on the device, what they're looking at is trying to limit the number of material or texture swaps, right? And unfortunately, even though the geometry has been bound into one bit of geometry, that creates a problem for us, because that means that we're using multiple materials on the scene. So I think we're roughly about 12 bits of geometry, 12 materials that have been assigned throughout the level. And the problem with that means then that you're going to have like 12 material swaps per millisecond, right? Which causes a problem in terms of like just general efficiency. Ideally, you'd have one atlas or one texture map for the entire scene, and so you wouldn't have to worry about optimizing from that perspective. That obviously takes a bit more work. Actually, it takes a lot of work anyway, but it's a lot of work to find out if you're heading in the right direction. Let's put it that way, right? So that so far we've seen that those optimization steps have been given positive results. Thing is that the only other optimization step that really stands out at this moment in time that would be a nice to have is to have the textures configured onto a single texture, one big atlas, and then have the UVs adjusted so that they look at the correct part of the texture. Currently I'm thinking, if I'm going to be utilizing baked lighting, there should be a way to get all those textures onto their own maps anyway, and so having it do material texture swaps should go away. That's the current thought process. If that is not the case, then I'm gonna have to kind of figure about some way to be able to get down to a single texture atlas. That would give us a major win and a serious boost in terms of the frame rate. So that's why we're currently contemplating going down that specific route. Okay, so that's a setup for the scene. What we're going to do now is we're going to start talking through some of the settings for the actual environment itself. So let's see if we can go into the project settings. Again, this is the first time we're having to document some of these things. Right, so in terms of, we have to have this XR plugin management. This is where things are going. These are the standards. At the moment, we've got Oculus, OpenVR, OpenXR. but none of those are ticked. If I want to be able to get over onto the actual device, I need to make sure that I think it's OpenVR and Oculus need to be ticked, and then from there, when I actually play the game, it should automatically open up Oculus, and then I should be able to be in VR and be able to do that. But at the moment, it's advantageous to me to be on the actual PC because I want to make sure that I'm focused for optimization at the moment, right? Right. So next, we're going to look on the player, and some of these settings will probably need to be tweaked. It's not to say that what we've got here is the best standard. It's just say this is the current configuration that we've got. These settings here, as you're installing things like Steam VR and Oculus, taking down the plugins, some of these will be set for us by default. If they're not, you need to make sure you do that. I wasn't using post-processing in the previous iterations of any of the projects, but I do know that one or two of the assets were using post-processing, and this post-processing stack was kind of required. So essentially, I loaded up the project as a Universal Render Pipeline URP project, and then I downloaded some assets from the asset store, and one of the assets was like, hey, we're gonna upgrade your project, are you sure you want to do this? And it's like, it was late at night, and I just went ahead and said yes, and that was like the worst thing I could have done, because that will actually, if it was targeting the standard shader and the project set for UPR, it's going to roll back the UPR settings and put the standard shader settings in. So you want to be super careful with that, right? So unfortunately, that did happen. It probably put me back a day, but it was good it happened earlier in the build rather than later. Imagine you had like 30 odd plugins that would be affected, but because it's happening earlier, it's like it's in a vanilla state. It means that you only have to focus for a few plugins to kind of get it back up and running. So so the post-process stacking is in. Whether or not I'm going to use it or not, that's a whole different thing. I found out about Emerald AI maybe the previous week, and that specific script symbol has been defined there. I'm thinking that the NPCs might be running under the Emerald API. From what I'm gathering, it's almost like a prototyping solution for the AI, but hey, it depends on how hardcore you're going with this thing, right? So if you can get away with using it, then you should. I've not worked with it before, so I've got to take out documentation. That's one of the things that's on the list to do, and so that's why that is there. So we're not going to talk through that too much further. Let's see if we can actually find the physics. So this is the physics configuration mapping as it stands, August 2022. Want to just make a quick note of that. It's for what's in the project so far. It appears to be doing what it needs to do, and we'll be enhancing this as time goes forward. The input that's currently being used, I think it's set to both, so both the legacy and also the XR settings potentially. Right, so active input is set to both, so that means that I can use a keyboard when I'm on the PC, and when on the device, then I can actually use the device settings because it's been set up to do so. Okay, so we're going to stop there with that. So that's pretty much it as far as key settings are concerned for the project. Let's take a quick scan through the package manager. So in order to get things back up and running, once URP, Universal Render Pipeline, got damaged, I essentially had to go up within the project settings to just above where the asset settings are, and find the key project JSON files. And I fortunately had a backup version of the project, and I overwrote those files, keeping in mind that the URP settings are quite key to making sure that universal render pipeline will run successfully. One thing that I did do, which was kind of threw me back a bit, was the shader graph. So shader graph has an upgrade available for it, but it's not verified. And going to the highest version is not a good idea, right? So I went up to 10.10.0 from 10.8.1, and I lost frame rate. The frame rate, like major die off on the frame rate, maybe 50%, maybe more. And fortunately, I recorded that. Wait, hold on there. I upgraded from 10.8.1. I downgraded, and my frame rate was back to where I needed to be, or at least a better position than what 10.10 was doing. So note, stick with 10.8.1. I also put visual effects graph in. I'm not currently using that. And the reason why I'm focused for universal render pipeline is shader graph means that you can edit your shaders without having to code. The old school coding thing is kind of before my time, and between the coding within .NET and then having to think about graphics coding, and that's old school graphics coding. So Unity themselves has let us know that, look, moving forward, shaded graph is the new universe, and the standard shader is going to be depreciated at some time. So that means any games that were being created the past 20 years that have been focused for shader graph, that concept is now old school. I mean, even on Unreal Engine, they have visual scripting blueprints and their material editing suite. So this is the equivalent what they have over here for shader graph. I'm just going to quickly maximize the screen. Just wait on it to catch up with me. So what I started here with this master shader within Unity, the general principle is that I want to be able to create a texture atlas that will essentially mean that I'd be able, the theory is that I'd be able to put this on all the assets that need a material and then give it a coordinate, and so it would look only at a specific area or region on the texture. That's a nice concept. But if you've got a 4K map and now you're trying to break that up into like 1K units or 5K units, you're losing quite a lot of resolution if the asset was built to work with like either 4K or 2K, and now you're going down to 250K. It's like, no, it's like, that's, you don't want to be doing that. And so for the demo, or at least the proof of concept, I was able to isolate different coordinates by giving it a specific ID, and that did work. But the visual feedback was quite low. That being said, that was like a year and a half ago, and I just wanted to kind of prove the concept and see what I was going to get. But if you notice, when you go into the environment itself, the walls, all that detail kind of goes, right? Because if it's in the shadows, you're not really seeing it that much. So if the resolution on the texture goes out the window, that's not the worst thing in the world, right? It just means then that you're still using a single texture, and that was the target. That's what you're looking to do, and obviously, or hopefully, get the actual the benefits in the game in terms of like a frame rate. So we're probably still gonna do some work on that. But I mean, if you look on the assets here, it's not like it's straight up in the video light. You almost have to go up to the wall to see what the actual details are. So in the background, if you zoom out, say, oh yeah, that it's just a wall, but it's not taking up too much of that the visual the visual impact on the player, right? So the players, I mean, obviously once you get the NPCs and things like that in the level, they shouldn't be staring at the wall at all. It's like a major afterthought, or at least that's the current thought process. So the idea here is if we drop resolution on these walls, it shouldn't really be standing out. But again, like I said, that's going to be another thing to kind of cast our eye over as we're going through and doing the play testing and things like that. But from a concept of the one of the levels, so right now this is showing as the first level, but in theory we're not going to be utilizing this as the first level. This is probably something like you're like 10 levels in, and then you'd get all this thrown at you, and you probably want this broken up. This is a very large level, and you're seeing quite a lot of details, like if you're on the top floor and you're looking down or something like that. So that's why I'm using it for the testing at the moment, because it is a larger level. Most of the other levels are quite small so far, and again, like I said, this is very, very early days. It's just trying to make sure we're doing the right things. So let's go back into the package manager for a second. I've highlighted some things. So actually, that's the main registry. Let's see what's in the project. Oculus XR plugin, Open XR plugin, post-processing shader graph, test framework, TextMesh Pro. We'll want to use timeline at some point, not currently doing so. Unity UI, universal render pipeline, version control, visual effects graph, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Editor, and XR integration, toolkit, and XR plugin management. Those are the core plugins that we're currently using. Now, how can I put it? There's a lot of kind of R&D that we're going to be doing with some of the other plugins, but as far as Unity's key plugins, those are the ones that we're kind of making note of at the moment. So that is a kind of breakdown for where we are with the project and how we're getting assets across from Houdini. Like I mentioned earlier on, if you have a lot of windows open or applications open, larger applications, you might find that Houdini starts running out of memory, and you start getting all kind of issues with the geometry or whatever it is that you're loading across. So right, how much time have we got? Oh, we got time. Okay, so in Houdini now, we're looking at the level builder. The level builder itself is quite generic. The idea here is that you can give the solution a series of curves, all right, all the way up here, and each level will have its own curve, and the idea is that takes a series of attributes and gets passed down the pipeline, and then the logic knows how to break up that curve and build up the level. Okay, there are two changes that went in. So there's geoprocessor, and essentially that is copied across, and it's been set up in such a way that the first one will create the core level, and if this is a specific type of level, then it will go ahead and generate a second area for the level that's like the lower level, or the one that's just under the key level. At the moment, I think there are two versions of those, but the majority of them are single level, right? So no downstairs type configuration. And then we'll go through in this loop, generate all the geo at 0, 0, 0, 0, and then from there it'll persist them, send them down to the file system, right, with Python, and so what that means is you're not storing all that geometry in memory, and then after that we'll load that information back up into memory and start processing it, so connecting it door to door, instead of just having everything sit at 0, 0, 0. And the reason for that being is that otherwise you'd have to manually do that yourself, and it's okay if you got 2 or 3 levels, but if you got like 30, 40, 50 levels, that become a bit of a nightmare, right? And so it goes through these loops and logics and gets everything placed in the area that it needs to be placed in. We're not going to step through that because that's a lot of work. But the that's the general idea, right? And then once we get to the end, we then write that back to the file system, leaving the geo in the location that it needs to be when it's loaded into Unity. Okay, so that's the level outliner, and then from there we have level extractor. And the whole purpose of this is that, remember when I mentioned the HDAs that get executed in Houdini? That's these, right? So this is for steps, this is for the points. Let's just get that highlighted and switched on. So there's those points out there, right? And those have the attributes to say what it wants to load once it gets over into Houdini, and it's driven by level. And I'll just show one more. I think I'll show the geo one, right? And so there are 3 parameters. There's a level, the floor part, and something else. Let's just wait until it loads up. Okay, so that's also only being done by level at the moment. I'll switch off points, and we'll put it in wireframe mode. And so there's the actual geometry that goes across to Houdini, to Unity, sorry. Yeah, and this is the HDA that will have the logic. So it's essentially looking on the file system, and based on like I said, the parameters. So here we're saying this is driven by level. So if I highlight that to level 2, that should then change. And if it doesn't, we have a problem. I'm pretty sure that's not what level 2 looks like, right? So if I change that to level 2, there you go, level 3, and so on and so forth. And you see it's essentially highlighting the different geometry based on which level, which floor, and which floor part. So we'll just leave that back at level 1 at the moment. And so that's how we're getting the data across from Houdini. So the next bit is the actual top networks. So the top network is how we're automating the level, and I'll just quickly walk through what that is. This is really important that we get all these settings right. So unlike what we just looked on, where it's actually showing us the part of the level or the points or the geometry that we're trying to extract, here it's a bit different. I'm going to take a full screen here. Maybe not, because we want to see this section here as well. So the high level of it is, we have a wedge that drives the level, we have a wedge that drives the floor, we have a wedge that drives the floor part. Then each one of these HDA processors is bound to an individual HDA from the file system. We use this specific environment variable, and again, you can always tweak your variables, but if I come in here, and what we're looking for now is the aliases, the asset aliases. Bear with me 1 second. Right, so here's a menu here under edit for aliases and variables. And here's a special variables that are created, but there's nothing stopping you from creating your own variables, right? So it's saying HEU environment path PDG, PDG directory, dir, so on and so forth, and it's pointing at the directories that it's doing the processing at. And so you'll probably remember these as and when you do need to, right? It's not something you change every day, but these are really quite critical. And how they're set up is you would highlight the variable and then you put the necessary path or string in here depending on what you're trying to do, right? So I'll close that down for now. The idea here being you can now enter that variable. Notice it's color coded differently, and just continue the string. So there's no need for quotations or anything like that. And then once that's set up, the only other thing you want to be changing is the asset output. and you can kind of tweak how the variable will get written to the file system, the actual name. And so this is just an example, and pdgdir is pdg directory. It's just a shorthand for the actual directory. So from there you can then go in and then you can set the variable. So here this level is being defined up here, right? And so there's the attribute name, and that's how that's processing. So when you kick this off, it will that's how these will be driven with like the level or the floor. Okay, so we don't really need to mess around with that. So that's level, that's floor, and then we have floor part. Yeah, okay. I'm almost certain this used to be going to 10, but that's fine. I won't really focus for that right now. And so essentially, when we're in Unity, it's kicking off the processing of these nodes. So let's just give it a quick example. So if I go ahead and say dirty and cook this, so there we go. That's been executed. Those have been populated, and then something's gone wrong on this level here. So there's the environment path. There's those variables being set, and floor. Right. It's not evident as to if that is actually failing. I'm gonna try and dirty and cook that one more time. Let's see what this is saying. Invalid port name for the operation. Okay, that's probably me doing the upgrade and needing to update something having to do with Python, or maybe the HD. Right, so the HDA processor, this from the previous version, is not compatible with this version. So I'll need to visit each one of these, possibly upgrading just the HDA processor and migrating the setting across. So I'll do that separately to this. So that's not like mission critical. It's rather interesting because it's not complaint from Unity, but I can see why and understand why that's actually doing that issue right there. So listen, I think we've pretty much covered off on the key bits and bobs as far as being able to integrate Houdini with Unity, and whatever settings we've been doing as far as the upgrade to Universal Render Pipeline. So from here now, it's all about optimization. So hopefully next weeks or so, a couple of weeks, we'll be able to hit a really good frame rate. And when I say good, I'm talking like we're trying to aim for about at least 150 frames per second before going in to start doing work with the NPCs and things of that nature. So yeah, wish us luck. Hopefully we're gonna have some fun doing that at the same time, and within the next month or so we're in a position where we start fighting some of these zombies. All right, I'm going to thank you guys for watching. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to release this to the subscribers right now. This is more me kind of documenting my own workflow, where things are. I mean, I've been away focusing on just work, traditional 9 to 5. Right now we're doing Microsoft Blazor, building an app with that. So that's a lot of fun. Some full stack software development coming out of COVID. So that's been keeping us busy at the same time. But yeah, this work, I've not been touching this for about almost a year. I think October last year was the last time I kind of focused for it. So, you go away from these things if you don't touch base with them every now and then. Yeah, that's not fun. So wish us luck, guys. I'll be giving an update, or at least doing a kind of diary to say where we are and how things progress. And at some future date, then I'll probably release this. But all of this is kind of NDA, right? Somebody would pay a lot of money to have this knowledge, because it's expensive R&D. This is not like run-of-the-mill stuff. So just giving this stuff away is yeah. So I'll probably hold on to this one for a while. This is more like just for me, just to say this is how you do XYZ sort of thing. But maybe we'll do a release on this later down the road. depending on how things go. And if you did watch it and you found it helpful, then hey, go ahead and drop us a comment, a like, and yeah, I appreciate to get some feedback from on that at the same time. But anyways, guys, I would like to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you found this helpful. And in any case, I will see you next time. Thanks again.